My name is Amelia. I'm 41, and I teach business administration at a university in Denver. My husband, Lucas, and I had been together for 17 years, long enough for people to assume we were the picture of stability. To anyone looking in from the outside, our life seemed well arranged. A comfortable home in the suburbs, steady careers, vacations planned with predictable regularity. B.A.M. Yet beneath that polished exterior, cracks had been forming quietly for years. I just hadn't wanted to acknowledge them. That evening, Lucas was in the shower. The steady rush of water filled the house, a soft backdrop to something I couldn't yet name. Then a small ping broke through the noise, a notification from his phone, left casually on the nightstand. I wasn't the kind of wife who checked her husband's messages. I had always guarded trust as if it were something sacred. But intuition has a way of whispering louder when it comes wrapped in a kind of dread you don't want to identify. The screen lit up, and the message was almost too simple to be threatening. Table for two confirmed at Lumiere, Friday at 7:30 p.m., window seat as requested. She'll love it. I stopped breathing for a moment. Lumiere was one of Denver's most exclusive restaurants. Lucas and I had once talked about celebrating our 10th anniversary there. But the plan was cancelled because he had to travel for work. I'd never set foot inside the place. And now he was making sure someone else had the best seat in the house. I didn't intend to open his phone, but my hand seemed to act before my thoughts caught up. The passcode was still our wedding date, a reminder of a time when everything felt simpler. What waited behind that lock screen belonged to a different reality altogether. Messages, photos, notes, entire conversations stretching nearly a year, all linked to someone named Sophie. A young blonde woman from the communications department at the law firm where Lucas was a partner. In an instant, the life I thought I knew shifted into something unrecognizable. Their messages weren't occasional check-ins. They were constant. Not daily, but nearly every hour. They talked about everything from her morning latte to the dress she slipped into at night. And then there were the photos. Pictures from a 2-day work trip to Santa Fe, Sophie tucked comfortably against Lucas's chest, his arm around her, his grin so wide it looked like a version of him I barely recognized. It was hard to believe this was the same man who once held my hand through the 2008 financial crash. The room around me seemed to tilt. It felt like the air had been sucked out, leaving behind a high, metallic ringing that drowned out everything else. Some part of me wanted to hurl the phone across the room, to break something, to scream until the walls cracked with me, but instead, I stood completely still, my grip tightening, my heartbeat thrashing against my ribs. "Have you seen my blue tie?" Lucas called casually from the bathroom, as if nothing at all had shifted, as if he hadn't just ripped the floor out from under us with a single dinner reservation. I placed his phone exactly where it had been, careful and deliberate, burying the storm, clawing its way up my throat. "Second drawer," I said, my voice so flat and cold it didn't sound like my own. That night, I lay beside him, my back turned, listening to his steady, oblivious breathing. My body felt stretched thin, like a bowstring pulled to the edge of snapping. How many times had I explained away his growing distance as simple work pressure? How many evenings had I chosen not to acknowledge the evasive glances, the spotless shirts that smelled faintly of someone else's perfume, the late nights he swore were spent at the office? Every quiet suspicion I had pushed aside suddenly made sense. I was no longer the wife who chose not to see. The next morning, I still pressed a kiss to his cheek before he left, just as I always did. "Good luck with the Japanese clients today," I told him. He smiled, nodded, completely unaware that I already knew about the candle-lit date, waiting for Sophie on Friday. The moment the front door clicked shut behind him, I picked up my phone and called the university's HR department. I requested 3 days off, not to fall apart, but to prepare. There was a difference. For 17 years, I had played the role of the ideal wife, but that morning, something inside me shifted, quiet but undeniable. I sat at the kitchen table staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, feeling strangely hollow. In less than half a day, the life I had trusted had split wide open. Yet instead of collapsing, something else rose in its place. Sharp, steady, and unnervingly clear. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want yelling or tears or theatrics. I wanted a plan. I didn't want to be the kind of woman who hurled plates against the wall and screamed until her voice cracked, only to be met with a mechanical, "I'm sorry," and a look of pity. No, rage wasn't the strategy I wanted. If Lucas planned a special evening with Sophie, then he would have it, just not in the way he imagined. I opened his email and pulled up his calendar. It was organized with almost surgical precision, as if he believed his secrets were safe behind neatly labeled appointments. There it was. Friday, 7:30 p.m. Lumiere. A note specifying a window table, dim lighting, wine arranged ahead of time. A meticulously planned romantic night for two people who apparently had nothing to hide, except their spouses. Next, I searched Sophie's name in his firm's employee directory. Sophie Walker, Internal Communications. 5 minutes later, I was scrolling through her social media. One more click took me to a profile that made my stomach tighten. Ethan Walker. Her husband. An executive architect at a major design company in downtown Denver. His photos showed a warm smile, gentle eyes, someone who didn't deserve to be kept in the dark. I didn't know Ethan, but betrayal is universal, and I believed he had a right to the truth. Still, I couldn't simply call a stranger and announce, "Your wife is cheating on you with my husband." That kind of message would sound unhinged. Even if it was true, I needed something subtle, believable, and impossible to ignore. As a lecturer, I had one useful advantage: the authority to invite guest speakers to university seminars. So I drafted an email that was professional, polished, and perfectly innocuous. Dear Mr. Ethan Walker, my name is Amelia Whitmore, and I teach project management at Metro Denver University. We are hosting a speaker series on sustainable urban design and recently reviewed your impressive work on the Rivergate Business District. If you're available, I would love to discuss the possibility of having you join us as a guest speaker. I have reserved a dinner for this Friday at Lumiere at 7:30 p.m. To go over the details. It would be a pleasure to meet with you. Sincerely, Amelia Whitmore. I clicked send. Less than 2 hours later, Ethan replied. Thank you, Miss Whitmore. I'm very interested in this opportunity. Friday at 7:30 at Lumiere works perfectly. I look forward to meeting you. I read his message more times than I cared to admit, my pulse quickening with a strange blend of dread and resolve. He had no idea what awaited him, but he would learn, not from chaos or shouting, but from the simple, undeniable clarity of truth. The most difficult part came next. I needed a reservation. Their reservation. So I called Lumiere directly. Good evening, the hostess answered pleasantly. We still have a few tables available for Friday. Do you have a preference? Yes, I said, steady and calm. A table for two by the window, if possible. Then I added, as casually as I could manage. And if there's one near the reservation under Hamilton and Rothman, ideally beside theirs. We're potential partners and would like to sit nearby. It wasn't entirely true, but it didn't need to be, and it worked. Of course, ma'am, she replied. I'll seat you close to their table. Any special requests for wine or dinner? Just a clear view, I answered with a small smile she couldn't see. On Friday evening, Ethan and I would be sitting only a few steps away from Lucas and Sophie, close enough to watch the expressions shift on their faces, close enough to let their carefully constructed fantasy collapse in real time. After hanging up, I stayed still for a long moment, letting the weight of it settle. Everything was arranged. No yelling. No dramatic scenes. Just a quiet, calculated unveiling. Lucas had always thought of me as gentle, easy to overlook. He had no idea how wrong he was. Friday night would correct that. I arrived at Lumiere 20 minutes early, wrapped in a teal silk dress Lucas once dismissed as too bold for dinner. My hair was pulled into a soft bun, makeup understated, and I wore champagne-colored heels that had never touched pavement until that moment. I wasn't dressing up for Lucas, or even for Sophie. I was dressing for a battlefield, one disguised with candlelight, violin notes drifting through the air, and crystal glasses shimmering under soft light. A waiter guided me to the table I'd requested. It was perfect. From my seat, I had a clear view of the window table, the one Lucas and Sophie would soon occupy. They weren't there yet. I ordered a martini, though my hands felt slightly shaky. Despite all my planning, the reality of what was about to happen pressed against my ribs, making it difficult to breathe. Not because I feared the truth, but because I was finally ready to confront it. Amelia Whitmore. The warm, steady voice came from behind me. I turned and saw Ethan Walker standing there. Tall, neatly dressed in a dark shirt, carrying the same gentle smile he had in his photos. Though now, up close, I noticed a trace of tiredness around his eyes. Maybe from work. Or maybe from everything he didn't yet know. "I'm really glad you came," I said, rising to shake his hand. "Thank you for accepting the invitation on such short notice." "The pleasure's mine," he replied, taking the seat across from me. "Your proposal sounded fascinating." We started with polite conversation, urban planning, teaching, sustainable architecture. I kept my voice even, my questions thoughtful, but my gaze drifted toward the entrance every few minutes. And then, finally, they walked in. Lucas walked in wearing the gray blazer I had given him for his birthday the year before. Sophie followed at his side in a fitted red dress, moving with the kind of confidence that suggested she believed the entire room existed just to look at her. When Lucas pulled out her chair, they shared a soft, intimate laugh, like two actors lost in their own romantic movie, blissfully unaware of the wreckage behind the scenes. I tightened my grip around my martini glass and forced myself to keep speaking with Ethan, who was far too kind to see that I was holding myself together only by a fragile thread. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched Lucas lean in, pour the wine he had pre-selected, his fingers brushing Sophie's wrist as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She smiled at him, tilting her head just so, candlelight dancing on her glittering earrings. Then, as I reached for my napkin, our eyes met. Lucas froze. His wine glass slipped in his hand, and the waiter barely managed to save it before it shattered. Sophie noticed his sudden stillness and followed his gaze, straight to me. Before either of them could register a reaction, I turned calmly back to Ethan. "Excuse me for just a moment," I said softly. "I need to step away." On my way toward the restroom, I planned each step with quiet precision. I didn't want the theatrics of a soap opera slap or a public screaming match. I wanted something quieter, sharper, truth delivered like a scalpel, not a hammer. Just as I stepped out from the hallway, I nearly collided with Sophie. She stopped as if she'd hit an invisible wall, her eyes wide. "You're Amelia, right?" she whispered. I nodded once. "And you're the one holding hands with my husband under the table while your own husband is sitting less than 10 steps away." The color drained from her face. Her lips trembled. "Please," she whispered. "Not here." "Why not?" I tilted my head, keeping my tone calm and level. "Isn't this the perfect setting? Candlelight, wine, music, everything arranged for a flawless performance." "Amelia, I wasn't. I'm not here for excuses," I cut in quietly. "But Ethan deserves the truth, doesn't he?" My eyes drifted toward my table, where Ethan sat scanning the room, concern etched across his face. He deserves to know who his wife chose to share her evening with. Sophie turned, as if instinct told her to flee, but Lucas was already approaching. His face was drained of all color. "Amelia, what are you doing here?" I didn't answer him. Instead, I looked directly toward my table. "Ethan," I called, my voice clear, steady. "Could you come here for a moment?" He stood and walked toward us, confusion in his eyes. "What's going on?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Ethan, this is my husband, Lucas, and I believe you recognize Sophie, your wife." For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to go silent, like someone had pressed pause. Sophie covered her mouth as tears spilled over. Lucas stepped back as if someone had struck him. And Ethan, he didn't say a word. Hurt etched itself across his face so deeply it seemed to hollow him out. I turned to leave, but paused. "Oh, and don't worry," I said softly, looking at Lucas without meeting his eyes. "Dinner is still on him. His company card seems familiar to her." Then I walked away, head held high, leaving behind untouched glasses, unfinished lies, and two people drowning in a truth they had never expected to face. When I returned to my table, Ethan was still standing, motionless, staring at Sophie, who trembled in Lucas's arms. Both of them looked pale, as if they had been yanked out of a dream and dropped hard into the unforgiving light of reality. I lifted my hand and quietly signaled the waiter. Please, I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. I need a private room. And if possible, merge our table with Mr. Lucas Hamilton's. It appears we have a few things that need to be addressed. The waiter hesitated for a heartbeat, eyes flicking toward the tense scene behind me, then nodded. I'll take care of it immediately, ma'am. Within 5 minutes, the four of us were escorted into a discreet private dining room. The lights were soft, the table elegantly set for four, an almost ironic contrast to the emotional wreckage sitting down at it. I took my seat first. Ethan sat beside me. Lucas and Sophie sat opposite us, shoulders tight, heads bowed like students caught cheating in the final minutes of an exam. Silence swallowed the room. No scraping chairs. No shifting plates. Just the faint hum of music drifting from the hallway and the sound of unsteady breaths. Lucas finally broke. Amelia, I don't even know where to start. Start 3 days ago, I said calmly as I poured water into my glass. When your reservation confirmation popped up on your phone, the one I wasn't supposed to see, his face drained of color. Sophie's shoulders sagged, her gaze falling to the tablecloth. Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but I lifted a hand to stop him. I don't need a speech, Lucas. I saw everything. Every message. Every picture. Every secret trip to Santa Fe. Don't bother trying to explain what it felt like to read it. I remember exactly. Sophie whispered, barely audible. I'm so sorry. I turned toward Ethan, my voice steady. He's my husband, she's your wife. The least we deserve is the truth, spoken to our faces. Ethan didn't move, his attention fixed on Sophie like he was staring into a burning building he used to call home. What are you going to tell me? He asked quietly. That it was a mistake? That you were confused? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you found plenty of clarity in the arms of someone else's husband. Sophie began to cry, her hands trembling. I never meant for it to go this far. It started as a joke. I felt lost, unappreciated at home. Lucas. He listened to me. I listened too, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I redesigned your entire office. You said you needed a space that inspired creativity. I believed you. I always believed you. Lucas turned to me then, his expression crumbling, his voice unsteady, not with anger, but with a sudden, dawning fear. Amelia, I know I messed up. I ruined the one thing in my life that actually mattered. But please, don't let this be the end, Lucas said, voice breaking. I smiled, sharp, cold, the kind of smile that comes after surviving a storm you never asked for. Lucas, the end didn't happen tonight. It started the moment you looked at Sophie the way you once looked at me. That's when you decided our vows were decoration, not a promise. He bowed his head. Sophie turned away, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I reached into my purse and placed a hotel key on the table. I'll be staying across the street tonight. I booked it hours ago. Hardly a surprise, considering everything. Lucas, you're welcome to go home, if you still have the courage to stand in a place you broke. He jolted upright. Amelia, please, don't do this. I'll do anything. I can fix this. You can't rebuild a house when the foundation is rotted, I said calmly. I used to be the kind of woman who forgave everything, but I've learned that sometimes forgiveness is just another way of betraying yourself. I stood, smoothed my dress, and turned to Ethan. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. He nodded, voice tight. Thank you for showing me the truth. It hurts, but I needed it. I looked at the two people across from us. Small, crumbling, exposed. I wish you both luck. Not because I forgive you, but because choices always come due. Sooner or later. And then I left the restaurant. My heels echoed sharply against the stone walkway outside, each step slicing through the quiet night of the upscale district. In my hand, a small clutch, and inside it, the key to room 1203 at the Celeste Hotel. A suite overlooking the sleepless city. A place where the lights never dim, even when the heart already has. The front desk welcomed me with a polite smile and handed me the key card. I simply nodded. Inside the room, I locked the door, slipped off my heels, and walked toward the massive window. The amber glow of the city spilled across the glass, painting my silhouette onto the wooden floor. For the first time in years, I saw myself, whole, unguarded, without Lucas beside me, without the shadow that had long been draped over my heart. I perched on the edge of the bed and finally let myself break. Not the kind of tears you see in movies. Neat and manageable. Not silent, either. This was a raw, violent storm of grief and rage. Uncontainable. Scorching through me. I cried for 17 years of youth surrendered. For nights spent waiting by a door that never opened. I cried for lies disguised as flowers and wine, for every time I believed I was cherished when I was quietly being replaced by someone newer, younger, easier. Time became irrelevant. I lost count of the minutes, the hours. I only knew that when the knock came at the door, I was still clutching a pillow, eyes burning from tears. I approached the peephole. It was Ethan. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, voice tight, eyes shadowed with fatigue. I didn't know where else to go. I opened the door wider. "Come in." We settled into 2 armchairs by the window. Outside, cars passed, oblivious to the wreckage of the night, the fracture lines running through our lives. Ethan was silent for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "I still don't understand how you knew, and how you managed to sit through dinner like that." I let out a soft, ironic laugh. I didn't sit still. I waited, for the right moment. For some truths, if you let someone else deliver them, they lose their weight. He nodded, voice tight. "Thank you, for not letting me keep living a lie." We spoke then, quietly, like strangers brought together by the same wound. He told me how Sophie had been the first person to believe in his most daring, impossible designs, and how he thought if anyone understood him, it would be her. I told him about Lucas, the man who had slipped a wedding ring onto my finger in the rain, promising never to lose his way. We had both been wrong. I'm going to file for divorce," I said, voice hollow, a strange calm settling over me. Ethan looked at me, calm but unwavering. I don't think I could live with someone who can pretend that well, either. I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not angry at Lucas anymore, not the way I used to be. Anger fades with time. But one thing I know for certain. I will never stay in a relationship that slowly erodes my self-respect day by day." He was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "You're stronger than I thought." "No," I corrected him. "I'm just the last one willing to look at the truth." That night, Ethan stayed in a separate room in the same hotel. Before leaving, he paused in the doorway. "If you need someone to get through this, I'm here." I nodded. "Thank you, Ethan. Tonight, I think you understood me better than my husband did in over a decade." Once he left, I stood at the window, watching his figure disappear down the long hallway. I didn't feel invincible, but I felt lighter, like I had finally set down a suitcase I'd been dragging for far too long. Lucas could beg, he could promise, he could send hundreds of apology emails, but my heart had closed the moment I saw the way he looked at Sophie, the way he used to look at me, and I didn't need anyone's permission to move on. I would walk forward on my own, with the same feet that had carried me through every storm. The next morning, I left the Celeste Hotel, while the city was still wrapped in fog. I returned to the house Lucas and I had shared for 17 years, not to cling to what was gone, but to clear away the remnants of a marriage that had ended quietly, long before tonight. Lucas was already in the living room when I returned. He sat slouched on the couch, hair tousled, eyes red, shirt wrinkled and half-buttoned. The moment I stepped inside, he sprang up. "Amelia, we need to talk," he said, voice cracking as if he'd rehearsed the lines for hours. I placed my purse on the table, calm, collected. Then I spoke. "I know you messed up," I said evenly. "I know you betrayed me, and there's no excuse. But there's nothing to talk about anymore. I'll do anything," he pleaded, taking a step forward. "Counseling, cutting off all contact with Sophie. I already told her she left the city. I swear she's gone." I cut him off. "Lucas, you froze because you realize there's nothing left to control." "What do you mean?" His voice faltered. "I mean she's gone," I said, watching his reaction. "I heard from one of her coworkers. Sophie quit and moved back to Santa Barbara this morning. She couldn't handle the office finding out." He sank into the couch again, hands running through his hair. "You told everyone?" he asked, panic creeping in. "Not out of revenge," I said, voice low but steady. I refused to live in the dark. I called your mother, Mark and Jenna, even your college friends, the ones you always tried to impress. I told them everything, that you cheated on me for nearly a year, hiding it behind fake meetings, disguised emails, kisses shared with another woman while I was cooking dinner, waiting for you to come home. Lucas shook his head, panic rising in his eyes. You've destroyed my reputation. Do you know what the company will think? What my friends will say? I laughed, bitter and sharp. You care more about your reputation than your marriage? Then let me remind you, you destroyed it, not me. I just stopped protecting the mask you built. He stepped closer, reaching for my hand. Amelia, please, don't do this. I love you. I really do. I stepped back. Love can't survive in the shadows of lies. If you truly loved me, you wouldn't have whispered baby to someone else while still holding me in your arms at night. He collapsed to the floor, shoulders shaking. She meant nothing, he murmured. It was a mistake. No. Lucas, I said, my voice quiet but sharp. It wasn't a mistake. It was a series of deliberate choices. Every step you took, every moment you decided to betray me, you had the chance to stop, and you didn't. Every message you sent her, every reservation you made, every night you walked out with a lie on your lips, you had countless chances to stop. But you didn't. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The truth was heavy enough on its own. He swallowed hard, desperation scraping his words. If you leave, you'll ruin my life. No, I said, meeting his eyes without flinching. I'll be saving mine. The week that followed was a parade of attempts, daily calls, long texts, late-night voicemails. Flowers arrived at my office, and then came a 4-page email from Lucas describing his journey to clarity after that night at Lumiere. I didn't respond. I had listened to enough apologies in my life. Silence, I realized, was sometimes the only answer that mattered. I hired a lawyer and filed for divorce. 3 weeks later, a close friend sent me a quiet message. She had seen Lucas and Sophie sitting in a small suburban cafe. They weren't laughing. They weren't glowing. They looked like two people who had gambled everything and lost more than they ever expected. 2 days after that, Lucas sent his final message. I tried to move on with her, but there's nothing left. She doesn't smile at me anymore, and I don't see you in her eyes. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because there was nothing left to say. A few days later, he deactivated all his social media accounts and temporarily stepped down from the board at work for personal reasons. For a man who once lived for appearances, it must have been the first time he was forced to look at himself without a mirror. Just the truth. Spring arrived earlier than usual that year. I noticed it one quiet Saturday morning as sunlight spilled across the dark wooden floors of my new apartment, warming the space in a way my old house never quite could. I was pouring coffee when my phone vibrated. It was Ethan. Coffee at Tanner's? I glanced at the clock. 9:12 a.m. I'm in. Give me 15 minutes. Since that night at Lumiere, we had kept in touch, first through tentative check-ins, then through regular weekend coffees. No promises, no pressure. Just two people who had survived the same wreckage, learning how to breathe again. When I arrived, Ethan was already seated at our usual corner table. His notebook lay open, and 2 lattes waited between us. I guessed right, didn't I? He said with a soft smile, sliding one toward me. I took a sip, warmth spreading through me. I'm starting to think you're the only one who remembers what I like. Lucas got my coffee order wrong for 17 years. We both laughed. Not the jagged, painful laughter from before, but something lighter, calmer, like air finally finding its way back into a room that had been closed too long. How have you been? I asked. Officially finalized the divorce last week, Ethan said, nodding as if confirming it for himself. Sophie hadn't said much, just left a brief note. I'm sorry for making you lose faith in love. I looked at him. And did you? He paused, eyes meeting mine. No, because I'm learning to believe again, from scratch. But this time, not in promises, in small, consistent actions. His answer left me quiet. Words weren't needed. In that silence, I felt it. We were walking the same path, even if we hadn't yet named what was quietly growing between us. The next months passed with a rare sense of peace. I returned to teaching, enrolled in a weekend photography class, and for the first time in years, lived without the label of being someone's wife. Ethan, meanwhile, continued to run his firm, but also never missed a single student seminar. Each time he stood before my class, sharing his passion for design and humanity, I felt inspired all over again. One evening, after a session, I invited him to my new apartment. Small, bright, filled with plants and sunlight. We had pizza on the balcony, watching the city shimmer below. "Do you think we're changing?" I asked, pulling a knit blanket over my lap. "No," he said, turning to me. "I think we're returning to who we really are." I stayed quiet, letting his words sink in. They reached a part of me I hadn't expected. One early summer evening, we walked along the river after an outdoor concert. Ethan suddenly stopped, looking at me with steady seriousness. "Amelia, I'm not in a rush. I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for. But if one day you want to try again, not a marriage but a relationship built on trust, honesty, and no secrets, I'm ready." I looked at him. There was no pressure in his eyes, only patience and sincerity. I smiled softly. "I'm not ready to love again the old way," I said. "But if it's the way you described, starting from friendship, sharing, no hiding, then maybe I've already started, without even realizing it." Ethan said nothing. He simply took my hand gently, no urgency, just the quiet certainty of someone willing to wait for the right time. That hand didn't promise anything grand, but it said more than words ever could. If anyone was going to help me write the next chapter of my life, it was the man standing beside me. Beneath the soft glow of lights and a gentle breeze brushing over the water, I felt it, stepping into something quiet, imperfect, but unmistakably real. This time, I wouldn't have to sacrifice my self-worth to keep love, because the person next to me had been broken, too. And now, together, we were rebuilding from those very pieces. A year after that fateful night at Lumiere, I received an invitation to Professor Martha Benson's retirement celebration, my PhD advisor, and someone I had always deeply respected. The event was held at Hotel Liore, elegant and understated, much like her. I arrived early, dressed in a simple yet refined navy dress, wearing my mother's pearl earrings. In my hand, a small wrapped gift, a rare book she had often mentioned in conversation. I expected nothing more than an evening of quiet laughter, gentle conversation, and the comfort of old mentors. But the moment I stepped into the ballroom, I froze. Lucas. He stood near the wine table, thinner, strands of gray at his temples, polished, still, but stripped of the effortless arrogance he once carried like armor. When he turned and saw me, time seemed to pause for a fraction of a second. He walked over, glass of wine in hand. "Amelia," he said, his voice rougher, softer than I remembered. "I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think I'd see you here either." I kept my tone neutral. I didn't expect to either. A faint, almost nostalgic smile flickered across his face. "Professor Benson?" I added. "She's the last one still in touch with me after everything." He nodded slowly. "She always sees the best in people, doesn't she?" Lucas studied me for a long moment, as if searching for the words he had avoided for years. Finally, he sighed, eyes lowering. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "A real one. Not because you need to hear it, but because I need to say it." I stayed silent. "After everything blew up, I lost more than I expected," Lucas admitted, his voice quieter now. "Not just my reputation or business relationships, but my own self-respect. I tried to hold on to Sophie for a while, but it fell apart faster than what I destroyed with you." I looked at him, not with anger, not with resentment, but with the calm of someone who had stepped fully out of the shadow of the past. "I hope you find peace," I said softly. He nodded slowly. "And you? Are you okay?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "I'm rebuilding my life on my own terms, and I'm not alone." At that moment, Ethan walked into the room. Charcoal shirt, understated blazer. The quiet confidence that had always felt like a safe harbor. When he saw me, he smiled. The light at the end of the tunnel. I had joked once. Lucas followed my gaze, understanding immediately. "He's a good man," Lucas said. "You deserve a fresh start." I placed a hand over my heart. Once shattered, now whole. "Thank you." I said sincerely. And so do you, he replied. Just start again. Only when you're ready not to hurt anyone else. He stepped back, giving me space to move forward, finally letting the past remain where it belonged. That night, Ethan and I sat side by side at the celebration. We chatted with friends, posed for photos, and shared a slow dance beneath the warm golden lights. No grand humiliations. No scripted promises. Just the quiet, honest presence of two people who had once fallen apart and were now building something real. Not from scratch, but from cracks healed with time, trust, and patience. As we left the party, I held his hand and looked up at the starry sky. You know, I said softly, there was a time I thought betrayal was the end. Ethan squeezed my hand gently. And now? Now, I said, I think it was just a pause, a break, so I could turn toward a better path. And we walked on, without looking back. Because the past had been closed with forgiveness, the present was painted with trust, and the future quietly unfolded in every gentle hand I held that night. 1 year after the storm, I was no longer the woman who had given everything for a husband who betrayed her. I was Amelia, strong, steady, and free. I hadn't just survived the pain, I had found a new beginning built on honesty and respect. Betrayal had once broken me, but it had also led me to a better life. I learned to place my self-worth above blind love, and in the end, I chose myself, with no regrets. What do you think of Amelia's choice? Was she too strong? Or exactly the kind of courage a woman needs to protect her dignity? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, real-life family stories.